Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for joining me here for this graphic design workshop. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe out there. Before we jump in, I should take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Emily Solis, and I'm a graphic designer and college student working towards my degree in that field. I'm also a proud first alum member. I was on the FTC team called the Soupbots from my sophomore year of high school to my senior year, and I loved every minute of it. So today we're going to dive into developing a team brand identity, and I want to start with sharing this quote by Susan Kerr. She's a graphic designer and iconographer. She created some of the first icons for Apple computers. Super cool. Highly recommend you check out her stuff. But she had this to say. So good design's not about what medium you're working in. It's about thinking hard about what you want to do and what you have to work with before you start. And this is something that I think is very universal for every, design field. So, whether you want to be a mechanical engineer, industrial designer, or a graphic designer, this is something that's really good to keep in mind. So, of course, before we start getting into the elements of branding, we first must know what a brand is. So, what is a brand? I'm sure a few brand names come to mind when you think about this question. Nike, Apple, Starbucks, to name a few. We're surrounded by brands everywhere we go. But what if I told you that brands are not necessarily a physical thing? Now, bear with me here. Of course, these companies and the products and services they offer are real. They do exist. But their brand identity isn't defined by that. So what is a brand then? A brand is a collective understanding that an audience has with that product or service. So in other words, it's all about an audience's experience and perception. It's shaped by culture, experience, and messaging, surrounding that experience. So now that we know what defines a brand identity, what does that mean for your team? Creating a brand identity for your team provides an opportunity for you to share what your team is all about and to provide an experience for your audience that is unique to your team. So where do you start? That's where graphic design comes in. There are many elements that can contribute to a brand identity, and a big one being logos. So let's start with that. So whether you're a team that has been around for a while or a new team starting out this year, it's never too early or too late to begin making your logo. A logo involves a design that is recognizable and conveys the message that you want to share with your audience. So what does that process look like? Before you start building a robot, for example, you need to brainstorm and make a plan for the design, right? Creating a logo is the same way. You need a foundation before you begin building. This is the time to talk with your teammates about what makes your team unique. Make a list of adjectives of words that describe your team. What are the things that are unique to your experience? So now that you have a foundation for your experience, you had those talks, you can start sketching concept designs. So think back to those adjectives and talks with your team. How can you convey those visually? Besides an interest in robotics, did your team bond over a love for dogs? Maybe you can add that to your logo somehow, since it's something that is unique and meaningful to your experience as a robotics team. And it's something that you can certainly share with your audience to make a unique impression. So choose a concept sketch that best captures what your team is all about and conveys the message and experience you want your audience to know about. So remember, creating a logo is more about communication rather than creating things that just look cool. A logo is more impressionable when it has a meaning behind it. That being said, as graphic designers, we want to create memorable and meaningful designs that effectively communicate a message, but are also visually interesting to look at. I'll admit that. So with a concept sketch chosen, it's time to bring that sketch into a vector drawing program. So there can be a learning curve when starting out these programs, but I know you all are super capable of creating awesome logos if you don't have experience before. So what does a vector-based program mean? If you're not familiar, there are pixel-based design programs and there's vector-based design programs. So working in a vector program allows you to create logos and artwork that are able to be scaled at different sizes. without losing visual quality, which is ideal for logos that will be used for a variety of applications. So whether it be creating logo decals for your robot or to be used on your social media page or in your notebook, it's important and beneficial for your logo to be adaptable for these sorts of things, as your audience can get a better sense of who your team is and what experience you want to share with them. So that being said, here are some logo design tips that I want to share with you all. The first one being to create a mood board. So you would create one, during the concept portion of your design. You can do this, using Pinterest, or, might make a team folder that, every team member can contribute to. Find inspiration out there in the world. You can find stuff online. If there's certain images that inspire you, color palettes, fonts, or other logos that you like the look of. You could take elements from some, from those different sorts of inspiration and make it your own. So I highly recommend doing that. The next thing is to try mixing two concept sketches together. So going back to my previous example of, let's say, you're a robotics team that bonded over a love for dogs. You also love robotics as well. So you want to mix those two together. Maybe, make a robot dog or something like that. I highly recommend, taking those two separate things, make your own concept sketches and try fusing them together. You can get some really interesting results that way. The next tip that I have is to design your logo in black and white before you add color. And this is more for when you take your sketches into a drawing program. So if you start with if you start making your logo in color first, it will probably look okay. It looks all right. But when you need to, let's say put your logo on a colorful background, it would make more sense to have it be a flat color, so either black or white. When you move a logo design from color to black and white, you can lose some details. So to avoid that, I highly recommend starting in black and white first, making sure those details, work with each other and are, contrast really well. And then you can start adding color. That being said, speaking of color, my next tip is to familiarize yourself with color relationships. Now, color theory is a very extensive, very complex things at times. There's a lot to it. I would just recommend doing research of, color theory and, the different sorts of, color relationships there are. So analogous colors versus complementary colors, that sort of thing. You can find a color palette that works for your team. And as far as, working in a design program goes, a very important thing is to save your progress often. This is something that, speaking from personal experience, I've forgotten to do at times. I've gotten into the habit now. You don't want to lose the awesome progress that you make when you're creating your logo. So make sure to, save your progress often. And the last tip I have here is to keep it simple. Sometimes simple designs can be the most effective ones. You don't want to make a logo that's too complex or, too crazy that makes it hard to, show what your team is all about. Just sometimes, it's good to keep it simple. Okay, so let's fast forward here. Now you have a logo. So am I done designing elements for a brand identity? Not necessarily. You can also create visual assets that are unique to the brand experience that you want to put out there. So what can that look like? You can create decals for your robot that are unique to your team's brand. You can also create promotional items that you can share with, other teams, friends, or family. Visual assets can include patterns and illustrations that can be used in sticker or pin designs, to name a few. So here are some design tips for creating visual assets. So the first one being cohesiveness. When designing, say sticker designs or pin designs or patterns or whatnot, it's important that the designs and stuff work well together. You don't want something that feels out of place or, kind of sticks out because, you can lose that sense of, brand identity. It can be a bit confusing for, some of your audience to, see that and everything like that. So that being said, you should create designs that fit your brand, something, that would be appropriate, not too different to where it's, kind of random, but, something that really works well with your brand. And lastly, to create using vectors. So like I mentioned before with logo design, using vectors is really helpful for, reformatting and resizing your logos for different sizes. So, when it comes to like visual assets and like promotional items, all different sizes. But yeah, you want to make sure that, your logo can shine through at any size, right? So since effective communication is essential in graphic design, it's important to bring this mentality into page layouts. So for your team, you want to share your research, engineering process, and outreach in a neat and organized way so it's easy to follow. Now, there are many programs out there that you can use for arranging your page layouts, and I'm sure you're all familiar with a lot of these. Google Docs, Microsoft Word. I know you guys got that. But yeah, if you do have access to Adobe InDesign, I would highly recommend using this program for creating paper handouts and stuff like that, as it provides a lot of extremely useful tools for page layouts, such as creating grid guides and adjusting typography, to name a few. So with that in mind, here are some tips for creating unique page layouts that can coordinate with your branding. So the first one being to use a grid system. So what do I mean by grid system? So a grid system is a set of guidelines, like visual guidelines that you put on your artboard, or, like the pages in like InDesign and like Adobe Illustrator, they're called artboards. But it's basically pretty much like your canvas from what you're using if you're not familiar. But yeah, it basically, sets certain guidelines that makes it easy to, align your paragraphs, to align headings, and, makes it a lot easier to arrange things in a visually pleasing way. And it also helps with readability and legibility as well. A lot of designers, take inspiration from, using the golden ratio, and they applied that to a grid system. This is something that I highly recommend you guys keep exploring. There's a lot of, cool YouTube videos talking about it, but it is very helpful. That being said, the next thing is to practice good typography. What I mean by that is, typography is a very extensive thing as well. But pretty much what I mean by this is to, be mindful of what fonts you use, choose one that really fits, what your team is like, and that really kind of fits with your identity. But also when it comes to making layouts with a lot of information on it, make sure that it's readable and legible. That's very important. Choose a font that isn't too hard to read. Just something that's easy to follow. I mean, I know you guys know this sort of stuff, but it's just something to keep in mind when making these page layouts. That being said, depending on what you're making, include relevant information. You don't want to crowd too much info onto one, layout, So organize stuff in a way that's easy to follow, highlights the points that you want it to, and that sort of thing. And lastly, keep it simple. I know I sound like a broken record, but this is super true for a lot of stuff, You don't want to make designs that are way too complex, very hard to follow, and that sort of thing. So yeah, you just keep in mind to keep it simple. So now that you've created a team logo, made some visual assets, and created some nicely organized page layouts, it's time to share them. So sharing your team's brand online can lead to wonderful opportunities to connect with other teams and gain a supportive following. A sense of community is something that's a big part at first, so don't be afraid to put your team's personality out there. There are many ways to do this, the first being by creating your own website or blog. Another way is to use apps like Instagram and Twitter to connect with other teams and share your own team's progress through the season. If you're a team that's been around for a while, you might already have these things, and that's great. I highly encourage you keep using them. And if you're a new team joining us this year, I highly recommend to, create these sort of things for your team, you know? It's a great way to engage with other teams and to really put yourself out there. You know, this is the part where it's time to be social, right? So here are some tips for sharing your brand online. So the first one being to frequently post updates. So of course you don't have to post, you know, every second of every day. Like, of course, don't do that. Don't stress yourself out too much about like posting super, super frequently. But also don't forget about it. You know, the people that are following you, you know, other teams, you know, friends, family, you know, they want to see what you're up to. You know, it's a great way to kind of, you know, keep that engagement up and everything, you know. And that being said, you know, I highly encourage sharing in progress and behind the scenes sort of content, right? You know, a lot of artists that I follow, I really love seeing you know, their sketches, their in progress things. You know, it's really awesome to kind of see how a project can progress, right? You know, for me, like sharing my designs, you know, I have a tendency to, you know, only post, you know, my finished stuff. I don't really show a lot of in progress because, you know, I'm like, my sketches don't seem that great. You know, I'm kind of nervous to share that sort of thing, right? Because, you know, in my mind, it looks bad, which, you know, not a good way to think, right? You know, it's your art, you know, celebrate it. But yeah, in this case, you know, I highly recommend sharing, you know, your team's successes, you know, your failures, you know, sharing, you know, the little victories that you guys have, you know, when you guys, you know, score something or something like that, you know what I mean? You know, share it, you know, we love to see that stuff, you know, have a lot of fun with it. The next tip is to, you know, when sharing photos, just remember, you know, good image quality. It can make a difference, right? I mean, I know you guys know this stuff. But yeah, just make sure that, you know, with photos, you know, that, you know, they're clear, not too blurry, you know, that sort of stuff. You know, just keep that in mind. The next thing is to, you know, of course, be thoughtful. I know you guys already know this sort of things, you know. Be nice to others. You know, you're representing your team, so that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, again, when it comes to representing your team, you know, also connect with other teams, you know, first as a family, and, you know, we're all here to help each other out and to have a good time and have a lot of fun with this season, right? So yeah, you know, reach out to other teams. It's a great way to meet people, you know, make new friends, you know, can lead to cool opportunities. But yeah, lastly, have fun with it.